Pull up, grab the fuel nozzle, and get ready to fuel up on trends and strategies to grow your travel center business in this episode of the Truckstops Here, brought to you by NATSO. Now, here are your hosts, Amy Toner and Darren Schulte.
Hello, welcome to today's episode of the Truckstops Here. This is your host, Amy Toner, and I'm here with my co-host, Darren Schulte. Hi, Darren.
Hi, Amy. Hi, Amy.
Hi, you guys are listening to the Truckstops Here, NATSO's podcast. Today, our guest is David Fialkov. David is NATSO's Vice President, Government Relations, Legislative, and Regulatory Counsel. David has been working tirelessly to make sure truck stops and travel centers are adequately represented on Capitol Hill during this pandemic. Hi, David.
Hi, Amy. Thank you for having me.
I wanted to talk with you about some of the federal government aid that's come out over the last, 6 weeks. Let's first talk about the Payment Protection Program. What do our members, the truck stops and travel centers, need to know about it?
So the Paycheck Protection Program was developed by Congress as a way to try and keep as many people employed as possible while the economy is kind of put in a medically induced coma. The hope being that there are a lot of businesses that may not necessarily be able to afford to keep people on payroll while everybody is quarantining in their homes. And rather than having all of those employees go on unemployment and enter kind of COBRA for health benefits and things like that, they remain on the payroll so that when people are allowed to go buy food at restaurants again and participate in the economy the way we do under normal circumstances, rather than kind of having to re-onboard new employees, you can simply have furloughed employees kind of come back to work. So that was the theory behind the Paycheck Protection Program. And it's available for a good chunk of NATSO's membership. Any company that doesn't have 500 employees, 500 or fewer employees, is automatically eligible for the Paycheck Protection Program. And basically, it's a forgivable loan, which basically means you get loaned money by your bank. And as long as you use that money for certain expenses, such as payroll or rent or utility payments and things like that, then the loan is forgiven. So it's certainly not anything that will make you whole compared to the way things were going before the pandemic, but hopefully it's enough to kind of hold you over and function almost like a forgivable bridge loan to take you to the other side of the other recession here.
I know I'm starting to hear of NATSO members that have gotten their loan. How about you, Darren?
That's correct, Amy. I am.
Have you had any questions people have given you on this, David? Like is there anything that everyone's asking you?
Yeah, so it's obviously a massive undertaking that the federal government is trying to administer here just in a month and a half or so. And inevitably there are complexities and there are shortfalls. So the primary one I'm hearing is that it appears as though some banks are particularly well equipped to process these loans and other banks are not. And there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of rhyme or reason to that, but it does create kind of arbitrary winners and losers where companies that happen to have been banking with a bank that has its act together and may be familiar with SBA processes is able to get their loan processed relatively quickly, whereas other companies that are in pretty much the same situation are unable to get their loan processed. So and you're hearing a lot about banks complaining about the portals and the online systems that the Small Business Administration, the SBA, has set up not working properly. So that there are a lot of headaches, and the fact that Congress has not, they put hundreds of billions of dollars into this program, but if you think about every business in the country with fewer than 500 employees having access to this, then you're talking about a lot of different businesses, and it's not fully funded. So there are some people who are unable to get their loan processed in time before the money runs out. So it's working like a gem for some businesses, and it is the source of a lot of anxiety and frustration for others. So we're having to kind of deal with both sides of that spectrum.
I'd imagine for our members too, they're also essential, right? So they're open, so they're running their business while also doing this. That's a lot to juggle.
David.
Right, that's right. I mean, a lot of the businesses, to your point, Amy, are probably doing this. Not that it's necessarily better, but
yeah.
If your full-time job is managing an SBA process, then it's a little bit easier for you to do it than if you're also trying to keep your business afloat.
David, I was just going to ask a question. Would you suggest or recommend or give guidance to our members? Let's say they've been struggling to get the application completed, or they heard that there's no more money. Would the best advice for them to still move forward regardless with that application, get it completed and get it in?
Yeah, that's always going to be what the best move is, and you should. Anybody who hasn't yet, who thinks that they're eligible for this program or maybe potentially eligible, should by now be in contact with their banking representative, who I would imagine is at this point well familiar with kind of the protocols and the rules of the road for this program, and that person should be guiding them through it. And that could potentially involve an honest assessment about whether they're the bank that makes the most sense, or whether there are other banks that they should look to that may have their act together a little bit more in this respect. But certainly it's something that any business with fewer than 500 employees should be actively monitoring and participating in this program.
David, we've had a couple of members this week, actually 4 this week, that have not gotten things completed. But one of the questions that each of them asked me was, do they think that, or do we think as NATSO, there's going to be another round of money put into the SBA? Again, I know at this point it would just kind of be guessing, but what are your thoughts on that?
So I think the answer to that is that it'll depend. It'll depend primarily on how the kind of phased reopening of the economy progresses over the next several weeks. You're seeing states like Georgia and Texas begin to open restaurants and things back up again. If things open up in a way that makes Congress comfortable, assuming that businesses will begin to be able to grow again, I think that may alleviate the pressure on them to feel a need to inject additional money into this. But if, on the other hand, things don't progress as well as a lot of people hope, and we have to kind of keep hunkering down, and social distancing is something that remains prevalent throughout the country, then I think at a certain point, the additional unemployment benefits and various other temporary policies that Congress enacted a few weeks ago will clearly not be enough to kind of hold us over until we're out from under this. And I think at that point, it's safe to say that Congress will have to inject additional money or some type of other relief for businesses and employees. But I think at this point, it's hard to say whether Congress will do it, and events will probably dictate what that political pressure will be.
Are there any other loans that you think our members need to know about other than payment protection?
Yeah, so there's disaster loans that are in place for that are always in place, right? The Paycheck Protection Program is something new that was created in the wake of this pandemic. Disaster loans are also SBA loans. Those have been in place for a while. They're designed to allow businesses to recover from things like tornadoes and hurricanes and earthquakes and things like that. But the scope of that program has been expanded to cover the pandemic as well. Those are not necessarily forgivable the way the Paycheck Protection Program is. So oftentimes, if you take out a disaster loan, you're going to have to pay it back at a reduced rate. But nonetheless, it's something that a lot of people are exploring at this point, and members who are willing to kind of potentially take on some additional debt at relatively low rates. That's something they may want to consider as well.
Darren, have you heard of anybody that's applied for that?
Yeah, at the beginning, there were some folks that decided to go that route. So, yes, we've had a couple of members go that route. They have also looked at doing the pandemic SBA loan. But yeah, we had a couple of members do that.
David, I know you're constantly on the phone with NATSO members. Is there some sort of any like common questions they're asking you right now?
Oh no, I mean, not with respect to the loans. Unfortunately, there's not a universal answer with these loans because the different businesses and the different regions that they're in and their different banking relationships is such that it's really something that's going to just differ on a case by case basis. But overall, I think that the industry, obviously, it's suffering right now. But if you compared to a lot of other sectors, such as more traditional retail or restaurants or things like that, I think the travel center industry is pretty well positioned to weather this storm. And I think that the people who run travel centers tend to be a little bit grittier than a lot of other retailers and kind of able to step up to the plate. So it's been pretty cool to see a lot of people just kind of really dig in and work with their employees to fight through this.
My last question was, what do you see as next? But you did kind of talk about that. Sounds like you're thinking, we'll see what happens with the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, so Congress did a lot of very expensive things in a very short period of time over the last month and a half.
Right.
And a lot of people think that that's not enough, that they need to kind of keep that up and want to put aside any concerns about the deficit and debt and things like that. Whereas, deficit hawks are kind of who were keeping quiet over the last month and a half, recognizing the unique situation where we were in, are now seeing economies reopen. They're seeing the curve flatten a little bit and are beginning to question the wisdom of additional macro spending policies that Congress does. So how that debate shakes out, again, will probably be dictated by events on the ground throughout the country. There's the additional complexity of whether or not Congress will be able to travel to Washington and govern. Right now, the plan is for the Senate to be back the first week in May. The House is not coming back until the next week at the earliest. But a lot of members of Congress are in kind of vulnerable populations, and they are going to have to obviously travel on airplanes and through airports and the like to get back to Congress. And Washington, D.C. is just now kind of entering what medical professionals are considering kind of the peak of the of COVID cases and hospitalizations and whatnot, and whether or not it makes sense to be bringing hundreds of people and their staffers back to Washington to govern right now is something that a lot of different people are debating. Right. And that complexity too is going to cast a lot of doubt on how much actual governing Congress will be able to do in the next few weeks. But that being said, I think that if between the financial crisis of a decade ago and congressional and the Federal Reserve's response to the current crisis, I think it is safe to assume that Congress and the federal government will continue to employ a seemingly inexhaustible array of policy responses to this kind of thing to try and prevent the economy from truly falling off a cliff. So I think that if things don't get materially better relatively soon, I'm fairly confident that we're going to see additional policy responses.
Right. Well, thank you, David.
That was fun.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Truckstops Here. You can find us online at natso.com/podcast. You can also find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. If you have any questions, I hope you'll reach out. My email is editor@natso.com. Goodbye.
The Truck Stops Here was brought to you by NATSO, the association representing truck stops and travel centers. Visit natso.com for more information. The Truck Stops Here is produced by NATSO in collaboration with Human Factor. Producers are Amy Toner and Darren Schulte.